She traveled 2,000 miles across a frozen country to marry a stranger. The letter said the ranch needed a woman. The letter did not say it needed her for 3 men. When the oak door closed behind Josephine Thorne, she did not see one husband waiting for her. She saw three tall men, 3 pairs of amber eyes, 3 identical faces shaped from the same block of frontier earth. And outside, the first great blizzard of the Montana winter was already bearing the only road back to the civilized world. She had nowhere to run, and she had no idea yet that one of these 3 men was hiding a secret that would either save her life or end it before spring. Gentlemen, settle in by the fire. Let me carry you back to Boston, October of 1874, where all of this began. The oak door slammed shut behind Josephine Thorne with the sound of a prison cell locking for the night. Montana wind howled through the cracks of the cabin like a hungry wolf circling its prey. And when she raised her head from the frozen wool scarf wrapped around her face, she did not see one husband waiting for her. She saw three tall men, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with eyes the color of amber honey. 3 men who stood in that fire-lit room like mirror images, as if God had shaped them from the same block of frontier earth and breathed life into all of them at once. The letter had said the ranch needed a woman. The letter had not said it needed her for 3 men. And outside, the first great blizzard of the Montana winter was bearing the only road back to the civilized world. Gentlemen, tonight I want to tell you a true story, or close enough to true that the difference does not matter. A story about an orphan girl from Boston, 3 brothers in the Beartooth Mountains, in the hardest winter the territory had ever known. A story about honor, about promises kept across 17 years and 2,000 miles, about the kind of love that only real men know how to give, the kind that gets earned through labor and loss, in the quiet work of showing up every single day. So settle in, pour yourself something warm, and let me carry you back to Boston, October of 1874, where all of this began. Before we get too deep into this tale, if you are new to this channel, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I tell stories like this every week, stories of the frontier, stories of honest men and strong women, stories that feel like the ones your grandfather used to tell. And while you are at it, leave me a comment. Tell me where you are listening from tonight. I always want to know who is sitting by the fire with me. Now, Boston. The rain came down sideways against the windows of St. Catherine's home for foundling girls, and Josephine Thorne stood at the 3rd-floor window, watching it streak the glass like tears she had stopped shedding a decade ago. She was 22 years old that October, old enough to be called a woman, old enough to know that the world had nothing planned for her except hardship, too old to stay at St. Catherine's another month. She had been 6 when the fire came. 6 when the Lowell mill, where her father worked the mill he had half ownership of, went up in a roar of orange and black that painted the night sky for miles. 6 when a neighbor woman had carried her out of the small house in her nightdress and told her in a broken voice that her papa and mama were not coming home. They said it was an accident. They said mills burn sometimes. Josephine had believed them because a child has to believe something, and grief alone is too big a thing for 6-year-old shoulders to carry. Sister Prudence had raised her after that, a stern woman of 65 with hands like rope and a heart like a bread oven, warm where it mattered. She had taught Josephine to read from a worn-out copy of the King James Bible. She had taught her the poetry of Longfellow, the essays of Emerson, the quiet comfort of Shakespeare's sonnets. And most of all, we had taught her to quilt. Sister Prudence had placed a needle in Josephine's hand when she was 10 years old and had not let her stop for 12 years. In that time, Josephine had made over 60 quilts for the orphanage, patchwork patterns that she knew by heart: bear's paw, log cabin, flying geese, wedding ring. She could see the patterns in her sleep. But quilting could not save her now. On the morning of her 22nd birthday, Sister Prudence had called her into the office with an expression Josephine had never seen on that weathered face before. It was the expression of a woman who had run out of good choices to offer. "My child," the nun had said, folding her hands on the scarred oak desk. "You know our rules. You are past the age. The diocese has been generous to let you stay these 2 extra months, but by Christmas, you will need to be gone from this house. I have 3 prospects for you. None of them are what I would have chosen, but a woman with no family and no dowry must choose from the table that God sets before her. The first prospect was Horace Grimshaw, 58 years old, a widower 3 times over. He owned a small grocery on Tremont Street, and he wanted, in his own plain words, a woman to cook and clean and mend. When Josephine had met him in the parlor of St. Catherine's, he had taken her wrist in his heavy, dry hand and had squeezed hard enough to leave a mark. "You will not need to love me, girl," he had said. "I am not asking for love. I am asking for service." His eyes had moved over her in a way that made her stomach twist. The second prospect was the Lowell Textile Mill, 12-hour shifts, the same mill system that had killed her mother. Sister Prudence had looked at her with tired eyes and said, "Child, you will not live past 40 if you go there. I have seen it too many times." The third prospect was the street, no prospect at all. And then one cold Tuesday morning in late October, Sister Prudence had done something Josephine would remember until the day she died. The old nun had closed the office door behind them, had pulled a folded newspaper from her drawer, and had pushed it across the desk. "There is a fourth option, my dear. It is dangerous. It is far. But it is the only one where you might yet build a life of your own choosing." The Boston Globe, a small advertisement circled in ink. "Respectable woman wanted for the purpose of matrimony. Montana territory. Must endure isolation. Hard work expected. Inquire of Everett Blackridge, Blackridge Ranch, Silver Creek Valley." Josephine had read it 3 times. "Montana is the other side of the world," she had whispered. "And the other side of the world," Sister Prudence had answered, "is sometimes exactly what a soul needs." Then the old nun had done something even more remarkable. She had reached into the deep pocket of her black habit and had drawn out a small cloth pouch. Inside was a single silver coin, an 1848 half-dollar, worn smooth at the edges from long handling. "This belonged to your father," Sister Prudence said, her voice trembling for the first time Josephine had ever heard. "He gave it to you the morning of the fire. He said it would bring you luck. I have kept it for you these 16 years because I did not want you to grow up carrying the weight of that night. But you are a woman now, and a woman must carry her own inheritance." Josephine had held the coin in her palm. It was warm from the old nun's pocket, and in that warmth she had felt something she had not felt since she was 6 years old. She had felt her father's hand. That night she wrote to Everett Blackridge of Silver Creek Valley, Montana territory. Her letter was plain. She told him she was orphaned. She told him she could cook and read and sew and quilt. She told him she wanted a home more than she wanted anything else on this earth. She did not beg. She did not bargain. She simply told him the truth and let the truth stand on its own legs. 2 weeks later, the reply came. 5 lines in a strong masculine hand. "The ranch needs a woman. Winters are harsh. Train fare enclosed. Arrive before November ends. Everett Blackridge." Inside the envelope was $50, more money than Josephine Thorne had ever held in her life. She took it as a sign. The train from Boston to Fort Benton took 11 days. It carried her through the gray smoke of Pittsburgh and the flat yellow seas of Illinois wheat and the vast, empty, rolling prairie of Nebraska and Dakota, where the buffalo still moved in small, dark herds under an endless sky. She had never known the world was so large. Boston had always felt like the whole of creation. Now she understood that Boston was only a small, crowded corner of something so enormous it made her dizzy to look out the window for too long. On the third day, somewhere past Chicago, a young woman settled into the seat across from her, tall and freckled with red hair pinned up under a travel bonnet. Her name was Mabel Callahan, and she was on her way to Wyoming Territory to meet a husband she had never seen. "Another mail-order bride," Mabel had said with a laugh that was half bitter and half brave. "We are quite the sisterhood on these Western trains, aren't we?" They had talked for hours. Mabel had stories, and the stories were not comforting. A girl from her own parish who had traveled to Kansas only to find her intended husband had been killed in a bar fight the week before she arrived, leaving her stranded with no money and no family. A woman from Philadelphia who had gone to Colorado and had been beaten so badly by her new husband that she had walked 50 miles back to the nearest town with broken ribs. A school teacher from Albany who had arrived to discover the man had lied about everything, that there was no farm, no house, no money, only a drunken cowboy in a one-room shack. If he sounds too good to be true, Mabel had warned, he is lying. Pray to God you get a hard man who keeps his word instead of a smooth talker who breaks it. That night in the rocking motion of the train, Josephine had pressed her father's silver coin against her chest and had whispered to the darkness, "Papa, if you are anywhere near me, please tell me I am not making the greatest mistake of my life." The train did not answer, but it did not stop moving west either. It was at the Chicago station during the long layover that the old man appeared. Josephine was sitting on a wooden bench reading the letter from Everett Blackridge for perhaps the 100th time when she felt a shadow fall across the page. She looked up. A man in his 70s stood before her, tall and stooped, wearing a wide-brimmed cattleman's hat that had seen 20 winters. His beard was silver, his eyes were pale blue and sharp as creek ice. "Forgive an old man for intruding, miss," he said in a voice like rolled gravel. But I could not help noticing the return address on that letter. Silver Creek Valley. You are going to the Black Ridge Ranch. Josephine folded the letter protectively. I am. Do you know the family? The old man did not answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face as if he were trying to remember something from a long time ago. I knew the father of those boys, he said finally, Ezekiel Blackridge. A better man never wore shoe leather. He and my own wife used to trade preserves when they first came out to the valley. I knew the mother too, Rosalind, a school teacher from Philadelphia, gentle as morning but steel underneath. They were the finest people God ever placed on this earth. Fever took them both. 5 years ago now. The 3 boys were grown by then, thank the Lord. But the valley lost something the day those 2 went into the ground. Josephine felt a small relief spread through her chest. So the brothers had parents who had been good people. That was something. But then the old man leaned closer. He lowered his voice. Miss, listen to me. I am not going to tell you to turn around. That is your decision and yours alone. But when you get up that mountain and you meet those 3 boys, there are things about that family that will surprise you. Things that are not in any letter they have written you. They are not bad things, but they are not the usual things either. And a young woman deserves to know before she walks into a house alone. What kind of things? The old man glanced over his shoulder as if he were afraid of being overheard. He reached into his vest pocket and drew out a small metal object. He pressed it into her hand. It was a military dog tag, tarnished copper. The lettering was almost worn away, but she could make it out. E. Blackridge, 2nd Massachusetts Cavalry. That belonged to the oldest boy, Everett. He lost it at Gettysburg when he was 20 years old. I found it in the dirt of my pasture 3 years later after he traded me a calf for a set of wagon wheels. I have been meaning to return it to him for a decade, but you are going to see him before I will. So you give it back to him for me. And when you do, you look into his eyes. You see what is there. And then you decide if you want to stay on that mountain or come back down. A man who keeps what he promises is worth more than gold out here. A man who does not is worth less than dust. What was your name, sir? Ezra Whitaker. And my Hattie runs the boarding house in Silver Creek. If you ever need a place to rest or place to run, to you tell her old Ezra sent you. She will take you in without a single question asked. Then he tipped his hat and he walked away into the crowd of the station, and Josephine did not see him again. She held the dog tag in her palm for a very long time. 2nd Massachusetts Cavalry. Everett Blackridge had been a soldier. At 20 years old, he had been at Gettysburg, where nearly 8,000 men had died in 3 days. Her fiancé, if that was the word for the man she was traveling to marry, had seen the worst hell that this country had ever known. and he had come home, and he had built a ranch, and he had needed a wife. When the train finally pulled into Fort Benton 4 days later, she was 4 days behind schedule. A slow blizzard had kept them stranded on the tracks in Dakota Territory for nearly a week. She climbed down onto the platform in the gray light of a Montana afternoon, and for the first time in her life, she understood what cold actually meant. The air burned her lungs. The wind cut through her wool traveling cloak like it was nothing but paper. And the sky out here went on forever and ever and ever, as if it had never learned where to stop. The stagecoach to Silver Creek took another 3 days. She arrived at the town on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-November. The sky had that heavy gray quality that old ranchers knew meant snow within hours. Silver Creek was not a town so much as a collection of stubborn buildings huddled together against the wilderness. Main Street was a single muddy road. There was a general store, a saloon called the Copper Elk, a small white church with a crooked steeple, a livery stable, a blacksmith's forge, a telegraph office, and a boarding house with a faded sign that read Whitaker's Respectable Lodging. Old Ezra's wife. Josephine went inside and introduced herself. Hattie Whitaker was a round woman in her 60s with flour on her apron and shrewdness in her eyes. When Josephine mentioned her husband's name, the old woman's face softened. "Oh, my lord child, Ezra sent you. Come in, come in. You must be frozen clear through to your soul." Hattie fed her hot beef stew and a thick slice of cornbread slathered with butter. She gave her a room with a feather tick mattress. And as Josephine ate, Hattie sat across from her with a cup of coffee and looked at her the way a grandmother looks at a grandchild she's about to send off to war. "So you are the bride," Hattie said softly. "I am." "The Black Ridge boys?" "Yes, ma'am." Hattie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Child, those are good men. Do not let the town gossip tell you otherwise. Everett fought for this country and came home with scars you cannot see. Silas patched up boys on the battlefield until his hands shook. Declan stayed behind with their mother to hold the family farm in the Virginia mountains when his brothers went to war. The three of them are triplets, you see. Same face, same year, same mother. But only two could be spared for the army. Someone had to keep the livestock alive while the Union bled at Gettysburg and Fredericksburg. They have earned every acre of that land up there with blood and work and grief. But their house has secrets in it, sweetheart. Old family ways. You will have choices to make that no letter could have prepared you for. You remember this. You always have a bed here. No questions asked. You ride down off that mountain any day, any hour, and Hattie Whitaker's door is open to you." Josephine thanked her with tears in her eyes. The next morning, Sheriff Rowan Calloway himself drove her up to the ranch in his own wagon. He was a lean man of about 45, quiet, with a long scar running from his cheekbone to his jaw. He said almost nothing for the first hour of the climb. The trail wound up through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen, the branches bare and black against the gray sky, the wind picking up harder as they climbed. Finally, halfway up, the sheriff spoke. "Miss Thorne, I do not pry into the business of marriages. It is not the law's place. But I have known the Black Ridge brothers since their daddy first brought them out here as boys. Ezekiel Blackridge was the finest man I ever knew. He kept his word. He paid his debts. He never drew first in a fight, but he always drew last, if you follow my meaning. Rosalind, his wife, taught half the children in this valley how to read. Those two died together in the fever winter of '69, lost them both in a single week. The three boys, they made a promise to their mother on her deathbed. I was in the room. I heard it. They promised her they would never separate. They would never divide the land. They would hold the ranch together as one family no matter what. And they have kept that promise for 5 years now." "What kind of promise, Sheriff?" The sheriff was quiet for a moment. "That is not my story to tell, miss. But when you understand it, you will understand it." The wagon rounded a last bend, and there in a high mountain meadow ringed by pines sat the cabin. It was larger than she had expected, 2 stories of hand-hewn logs, each log as thick as a man's chest, a long covered porch, a stone chimney already pouring gray smoke into the graying sky. Behind the main house, a great barn easily 80 feet long, corrals for horses, a smokehouse, a well house. Further back, she could see cattle moving slowly across the meadow, their breath visible in small white clouds. This was not the shack of a desperate wild man. This was a real homestead, built by real hands, built to last. Sheriff Calloway stopped the wagon 200 yards from the cabin. "I can take you no closer, miss. The weather is turning and I have to make Silver Creek before full dark. You have the dog tag to return to Everett." "I do." "Then God be with you, Josephine Thorne. And remember Hattie Whitaker's door in case the wind ever turns on you up here." He handed her a lit lantern. He tipped his hat, and then he was gone, the wagon rattling back down the trail into the pines. She was alone. She picked up her carpet bag. The snow was already falling in thick, slow flakes. It had risen to her knees on the path. Each step was a decision. Each breath was a question. By the time she reached the porch, her fingers were so numb she could not feel them. She could not even lift her hand to knock. The door opened on its own, and there they stood. Three men, each one 6 foot 6 inches tall, each one with shoulders broad as axe handles and hair dark as winter bark cut roughly to the collar. 2 or 3 days of beard on each jaw, eyes the color of wild mountain honey when sunlight hits it from the side, flannel shirts in dark plaid, suspenders, heavy canvas trousers, work-worn boots. They were identical the way 3 trees from the same seed are identical, 3 living copies of the same man. For a long moment she could not speak. She could not move. She could not even tell them apart. The one in the center stepped forward. His voice was low and deliberate, the voice of a man who had learned to choose his words the way another man might choose his bullets. "Miss Thorne, I am Everett Blackridge. We had begun to think you were not coming. Please come inside. The storm is almost on us." He stepped aside. She walked into the warmth of the cabin. The door closed behind her. And as she looked around that firelit room, as she looked from one identical amber-eyed face to another, and then another, she understood at last what old Ezra had meant, what Hattie Whitaker had meant, what even the sheriff had danced around. The letter had said the ranch needed a woman. The letter had not said that 3 men shared the ranch, that 3 brothers held it together, that the promise they had made to their dying mother was to never separate, never divide, never go on without each other, that any woman who came into their lives would one way or another come into all 3 of their lives. And outside, the wind rose to a shriek, and the first true blizzard of the Montana winter began to bury the trail she had come in on. Now she could see them clearly, and she could finally tell them apart when she really looked. Everett, the one who had spoken first, had a small scar through his left eyebrow, old and white, a saber cut she would later learn from the second day at Gettysburg. His jaw was set in the hard line of a man who had grown used to making decisions no one else wanted to make. He did not smile, but he was not unkind. He was simply a man who had left his easy laughter somewhere on a battlefield in Pennsylvania and had never gone back to collect it. The second brother stood a half step behind Everett. He had a pair of reading spectacles pushed up on his forehead and a leather-bound book in one hand, his fingers still marking his place. His movements were quieter, more watchful. There was a long, faded scar running across the back of his left hand from knuckle to wrist. His voice, when he finally spoke, was softer than his brother's. "Please, Miss Thorne, sit by the fire. We have coffee hot on the stove, and we need to talk." This was Silas. The third brother pushed past both of them and took her carpet bag from her numb fingers before she had realized she was about to drop it. "Give that here," he said, and his voice carried the warmth that the other 2 had buried somewhere. "You are near frozen. Lord woman, your hands are blue. Come on to the fire." His eyes held a light in them that Everett and Silas had somehow hidden, a quickness, almost a playfulness behind the amber. He was the one who smiled first, the one whose laughter sat closer to the surface. This was Declan. She sat in a cane-backed chair by the great stone fireplace. Someone pressed a tin cup of black coffee into her hands. The warmth of it started her fingers and aching as the blood came back. She sipped. It was strong enough to strip varnish. Everett stood across the hearth from her. Silas sat at the long oak table, still holding his book. Declan leaned against the mantel above her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him as another kind of warmth separate from the fire. For a long moment, no one spoke. She studied the room, a long oak dining table with 8 chairs built to last 100 years. Shelves of books along the western wall, maybe 200 volumes. Tools hung in careful order near the back door, a brass oil lamp on the table, a Winchester repeating rifle on pegs above the door, oiled and ready, the Bible on a side table worn at the edges, a small wooden carving of a songbird set on the windowsill so delicate and true that she could almost hear it sing. This was a home, a real home, made by people who cared for it. Finally, she drew a breath and asked the question. Mr. Blackridge, your letter said the ranch needed a woman. It did not say that 3 men lived here. It did not say that 3 men needed a wife. The brothers glanced at one another. She saw something pass between them, some wordless communication that only came from a lifetime shared. Then Everett drew his own breath. When he spoke, his voice was level, careful, and perfectly honest. Miss Thorne, I will not lie to you. I could have. I chose not to. The 3 of us live here together. Our father and mother lie buried on the eastern ridge 5 years gone. On our mother's deathbed, we made her a promise. We promised that we would not separate, that we would keep this ranch as one family, that whichever of us found a wife, she would not be only his wife. She would be part of all 3 of our lives. Not in law. In law, you would marry only me. But in the daily bread of this place, in the worm and the mills and the years to come, you would be family to Silas and Declan as much as you would be family to me. He paused. He looked at the floor. Then he looked back at her. I know how that sounds. I know that a letter saying as much would have scared you off. So I wrote a letter that was not the whole truth. That is on my conscience, and I will answer for it. But I will tell you this, Miss Thorne. We do not ask it of you tonight. We do not ask it of you tomorrow. We do not ask it of you in 1 week or 1 month. You came here in good faith. You will be given a room of your own. It has a lock on the inside of the door. You will be given our mother's room if that is acceptable to you. No man in this house will set foot in it unless you invite him. You will have until the spring to decide what you want. And in the spring, if you want to go, we will take you to Helena with $200 in your pocket and our blessings and our apologies for not having told you the full truth from the first letter. Silas spoke next gently. We will not pressure you, Miss Thorne. We are not that kind of men. Whatever our arrangement is, whatever our history is, we were raised by Ezekiel and Rosalind Blackridge. And our father taught us one thing above all others. A man keeps his word. That is what a man is. A man who does not keep his word is nothing at all. Declan leaned down beside her chair. His amber eyes were close to hers now, and there was fire in them, but not the kind of fire she had been afraid of. And if any of us ever makes you uneasy in this house, he said quietly, you tell the other 2. We will handle it. That is a promise I will make to you right now in front of my brothers, and I will keep it to my last breath. She looked from one face to another to another. 3 sets of amber eyes. 3 men who had just told her a truth that most men would have buried forever. She was afraid. She was not going to pretend she was not afraid. But she was something else too. She was something she had not felt in 16 years. She was standing in a room where no one was trying to trick her. No one was squeezing her wrist. No one was telling her to be grateful for the scraps. 3 men had just told her the whole truth, had promised her safety, had offered her a way out in the spring with money in her pocket. And Sister Prudence's voice was in her ear from her last morning at St. Catherine's, saying, child, the other side of the world is sometimes exactly what a soul needs. She set down her coffee cup on the stone hearth. She reached into her traveling bag. She pulled out the copper dog tag that old Ezra had pressed into her palm in Chicago. She held it up. Everett Blackridge, a man in Chicago, asked me to return this to you. He said his name was Ezra Whitaker. He said he found it in his pasture after you traded him a calf for some wagon wheels 10 years ago. Everett's face changed. For the first time, she saw something break through the hard line of his mouth. Something that was almost a smile, almost a boy's smile. He took the tag from her. He closed his fist around it, and he closed his eyes for one long moment. Old Ezra, he said, I had forgotten I ever lost this. He said to tell you, a man who keeps what he promises is worth more than gold. Everett opened his eyes, and when he looked at her this time, the amber was warm. That sounds like him. Silas rose from the table. He walked to the great window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Outside, the snow was no longer falling. The snow was hurtling sideways, a solid white wall, the kind of storm where a man could die 20 feet from his own front door if he lost his direction. Miss Thorne, Silas said, still looking out at the storm, I think you should see this. She rose and went to the window. Declan came too. Everett came last, the dog tag still closed in his fist. The world outside had vanished. There was no barn. There was no meadow. There was no trail. There was only white, an ocean of white roaring past the glass. This is only the first one, Shada said softly. They will come every week or two until March. The passes will close by tomorrow morning. Even the sheriff cannot come up here again until the spring thaw. Miss Thorne, whatever you decide about us, you will be deciding it from inside this cabin. There is no road out before April. I am telling you this so that you know exactly where you stand. Not because we want to trap you, because you deserve the truth of what is already decided by the weather. She looked out at the storm. She thought of her father's silver coin warm in her pocket. She thought of Sister Prudence's tired eyes. She thought of Horace Grimshaw's hand on her wrist. She thought of Mabel Callahan saying, pray to God you get a hard man who keeps his word. 3 men had just given her the whole truth. 3 men had just offered her their mother's room with a lock on the inside. 3 men had just stood in front of her and told her that in the spring she could leave with money in her pocket and no hard feelings. The road was closed, but she had the strangest feeling she would not have walked down it even if it had been open. Everett Blackridge, she said quietly, I will stay the winter. I will make no promises beyond that. But I will stay the winter, and we will see what the spring brings. Everett nodded once, slowly, like a man who had been holding his breath without knowing it. Then welcome to Blackridge Ranch, Miss Thorne. Declan grinned the first true grin she had seen on any of them. Josephine, may we call you Josephine? Hey. She considered the 3 of them. 3 faces, 3 pairs of amber eyes, 3 men who had given her more honesty in 10 minutes than the world had given her in 22 years. My family called me Josie, she said, when I had a family. Silas smiled small and warm. Then you have one again. Welcome home, Josie. Outside, the wind shrieked across the meadow, and the snow buried the road she had come in on. And inside the cabin by the fire, 4 strangers sat down together to share the first meal of what would become the strangest and most unexpected family that the Montana mountains had ever held. That night, Everett carried her carpet bag up the narrow staircase to the small room at the top of the landing. The door was of heavy oak with a good iron lock. Inside was a narrow bed made up with a patchwork quilt of extraordinary work, a small writing desk, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a single window looking out over the Black Mountains. On the bedside table was a worn leather Bible. Everett set down her bag, paused at the threshold, and did not cross it. This was our mother's room, he said. We have not opened it in 5 years. We aired it out this morning when we saw the sky and knew you would be arriving today or tomorrow. If there is anything of hers in here that troubles you, we can move it. If there is anything missing, you need tell us, and we will find it. The door locks from the inside. None of us will ever turn that handle without your permission. Sleep well, Josie Thorne. You are safe under this roof. On my life, you are safe. Then he bowed his head slightly, and he pulled the door closed, and she heard his boots go back down the stairs. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long while. She opened Rosalind's Bible on the bedside table. She turned the pages slowly, and halfway through the book of Ruth, she found a passage underlined in faded pencil. In the margin, in a woman's careful handwriting, was a single line: 3 sons, 3 blessings. Rosalind Blackridge, June of 1843. She held the Bible against her chest. Outside, the storm howled. The cabin held. She heard the 3 brothers speaking in low voices down below, their words indistinct through the floor, but their tones unmistakable. Everett's deep certainty. Silas's thoughtful cadence. Declan's quicker, brighter rhythm. 3 voices woven together like the strands of a single rope. She did not lock the door. She climbed under the quilt made by a woman she would never meet, a woman who had apparently welcomed each of her 3 amber-eyed boys as a blessing. She pressed her father's silver coin against her palm, and she whispered into the dark of the mountain room a single sentence, the same sentence she had heard Everett murmur earlier that evening as he banked the fire. Winter always ends. And somewhere between that whisper in the morning, Josephine Thorne fell asleep for the first time in her life in a house where no one was going to squeeze her wrist, no one was going to lie to her, and no one was going to tell her to be grateful for less than she deserved. She did not yet know she had come home. She did not yet know that the ranch had been waiting for her for 17 years, that her father's old friend lay buried on the eastern ridge under a pine cross, that the very walls around her had been raised in part with money her father had invested in a partnership before a man named Cornelius Draycott had set a mill on fire in Massachusetts and walked west with another man's name and another man's fortune. She did not know any of that yet. All she knew, as the wind screamed and the snow rose against the window and the 3 Blackridge brothers sat silent by their fire below, was that she had made a decision. And for the first time in 22 years, the decision had been hers. Morning came to the Blackridge cabin with the sound of an axe biting into frozen pine. Josephine Thorne opened her eyes to a gray light that was not quite dawn. The small window of Rosalind's room was already half buried in snow. She lay still for a moment under the patchwork quilt and listened to the steady rhythm of chopping out in the yard. Thock, thock, thock. A man's unhurried labor in the cold. Somewhere else further off, she could hear the low complaint of cattle shifting in the great barn. She had survived her first night on the mountain. She dressed quickly in the cold, pulling her wool stockings up to her knees and fastening the heavy navy traveling dress that was already beginning to feel too formal for where she now was. She splashed cold water from the porcelain basin onto her face. She pinned her honey blonde hair up in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, and then she did something she had not done the night before. She walked to the bedroom door. She turned the iron key. She unlocked it. She went down the narrow staircase carefully, one hand on the railing. The main room of the cabin was empty but warm. A fresh fire burned in the great stone hearth. On the long oak table, someone had set a plate for her, a stack of buckwheat pancakes under a linen cloth, a small jar of wild raspberry preserves, a pat of butter, a tin pot of coffee kept warm on a trivet near the fire. Beside the plate was a folded piece of paper written in a neat hand she would come to know was Silas's. "Miss Thorne, we are tending to the animals. Please eat something. We will speak when we return." The Blackridge brothers. She stood there a moment with her hand on the paper. No one had set a place for her at a table in 16 years. Sister Prudence had loved her, but St. Catherine's had been a refectory of 40 hungry orphan girls, where food was rationed and cold and eaten standing. No one had kept coffee warm for her. No one had laid out wild raspberry preserves because they had guessed she might like something sweet after such a long journey. She sat down. She ate. The pancakes were the best thing she had ever put in her mouth. An hour later, she heard the porch boards groan under heavy boots, the stomp of snow being knocked off, the low murmur of 3 voices. The door opened and the Blackridge brothers came in one by one like a small, disciplined army. Everett first, his beard whitened with frost, a rime of ice on the brim of his wide hat. Silas next, a leather satchel under his arm, his spectacles fogged from the sudden warmth. Declan last cheeks flushed red with the cold, a grin already forming, when he saw her sitting at the table with an empty plate. She ate every bite, Declan announced to his brothers. Boys, I think we can keep her. Josephine felt heat rise to her face before she could stop it. Everett shot his youngest brother a look that would have frozen a creek in July. Declan, I'm only saying. Do not only say. Silas sighed and set down his satchel. Miss Thorne, please forgive our brother. He was dropped on his head as a child. All three of us were dropped on our heads as children, Declan said cheerfully, hanging his coat on the wall peg. The difference is some of us recovered. Despite herself, despite the strangeness of the morning, and the strangeness of the house, and the strangeness of three identical men standing in front of her, Josephine laughed. It came out small and surprised, more a breath than a sound, but it was a laugh, and she saw it register on all three of their faces, a small, hidden pleasure, as if they had not heard such a sound inside these walls in a very long time. Everett was the one who brought them back to business. He removed his hat and hung it on its peg. He poured himself a cup of coffee. He sat down across from her at the table. Silas took the chair beside him. Declan, restless, leaned against the mantel. Josephine, Everett said, we need to set the terms of this arrangement, plainly, so that there is no confusion between any of us. I agree. First, this is your home for the winter. Our mother's room is yours. You will use it for as long as you stay under this roof, whether that is until April or until the end of your days. No man in this house crosses that threshold without your word. Is that clear? It is clear. Second, we do not expect you to earn your keep. You came here on the strength of my letter, and that letter was not the whole truth. So the weight of this arrangement sits on my shoulders, not yours. You will eat what we eat. You will be warm when we are warm. You will want for nothing that we can provide. Everett, I did not come here to be a burden. I came here to work. I know how to cook. I know how to mend. I can read and write and keep ledgers. Sister Prudence taught me sums from the time I was 8. I can quilt. I will not sit in a chair by the fire for 5 months while 3 men work a ranch around me. Silas smiled faintly. She has a spine, brother. So I see, Everett said. Third, Josephine continued before she lost her nerve. I want to learn. I want to know how this ranch works. I want to know how to handle animals, how to read the weather, how to keep myself alive on this mountain. If I choose to stay past spring, I will not be a parlor wife who does not know one end of an axe from the other. If I choose to leave, I will leave with skills I did not have when I arrived. Either way, teach me. The three brothers exchanged another one of those glances. Everett drew a long, slow breath. Then he nodded once. Agreed. Each of us will teach you something. Declan will teach you the animals. Silas will teach you the books and the ledgers. I will teach you the wood, the weather, and the rifle. The rifle? Miss Thorne, we are 40 miles from the nearest lawman. The nearest doctor is 3 days away in summer and unreachable in winter. Every woman on this mountain learns how to shoot before the first snowfall. My mother could put a lead ball through a tin cup at 60 yards. You will learn too. And the fourth thing, Declan added, pushing off the mantle, is that nobody in this house raises a voice at anyone else. Not ever. My father ran a tight ranch and a kind one. Voices raised were voices that never came back. You have a grievance with any of us, you name it. We hear it. We answer it, plain and straight. No shouting, no door slamming, no days of cold silence. That is a Black Ridge house rule, and it was laid down by my mother, and we keep it to this day. Josephine looked at the three of them. She felt that knot in her chest she had been carrying since Boston loosened by another small notch. Agreed, she said quietly. All 4 terms. Agreed. Everett reached across the table. He did not take her hand. He simply set his own open palm flat on the wood between them. Then we have an accord. Josephine Thorne. She placed her palm next to his, not touching. We do. And so began the first week. Silas gave her the tour that afternoon once the morning storm had eased to a heavy gray stillness. He led her through the main cabin naming room she had not yet seen. A small pantry off the kitchen stocked floor to ceiling with glass jars of preserved vegetables, smoked meats hanging from hooks, sacks of flour and coffee, and dried beans enough for 6 months. A washroom at the back of the house with a cast iron stove for heating water and a copper tub on legs. A second bedroom on the ground floor that the three brothers shared, three narrow beds in a row, along in the wall, each made up plain and neat as a soldier's bunk. A small study off the main room with a roll-top desk, a wall of ledger books, and 200 volumes of books Rosalind had brought west in a covered wagon in 1866. Shakespeare, Silas said, running a finger down a leather spine. Dickens, Thoreau, Emerson, the Bronte sisters, Frederick Douglass, a complete Longfellow. Mother believed that a house without books was a house without windows. She would read aloud every night after supper. My father would listen with his pipe. We grew up falling asleep to the sound of her voice reading Great Expectations. Josephine touched the spine of the Longfellow. Sister Prudence used to read Evangeline to us on winter evenings. Then you will feel at home in here, I think. He led her next through the back door and across a short covered walkway to the great barn. Inside, the warmth of 40 head of cattle rose up and wrapped around her like a second blanket. The air was thick with the smell of hay and leather and animal. Horses in a row of 6 stalls, milk cows in their own section, a small herd of sheep, chickens clucking in a separate coop, 2 barn cats watching from the rafters with professional disinterest. Silas named everything. The Hereford heifer who was due to calve in February, the Angus bull they had bought 2 years ago from a Texas drover, the old Percheron mare named Willow who had belonged to their mother. She has not let anyone ride her since Mama died except Declan. She will let him. No one else. Why Declan? Silas smiled a small, private smile. Declan has a way with animals that the rest of us do not. Our mother used to say he was born halfway between a boy and a colt and never quite decided which one to be. They walked the property together in the pale afternoon light. Silas showed her the smokehouse with its racks of venison and beef, the well house with its 50-foot shaft of sweet, cold water that never failed, the ice house where great blocks cut from the frozen creek were stored under sawdust to last through August, the tool shed with its rows of hand planes and chosen froze and draw knives, each one hung on its own peg, each one oiled and sharp. Everett made most of these handles, Silas said, lifting a broadaxe with a handle of smooth curly maple. Winter evenings, he cannot sit still without a piece of wood in his hands. And you? I read, I write, I keep the books. Declan makes the music and carves the small things. Everett makes the useful things. We each found our own way of being quiet together. Josephine thought about that as they walked back toward the cabin. 3 brothers who had found 3 different ways of being quiet together. It was not the kind of sentence she had ever heard used to describe a family before. That first week rolled into the second. The weather held at a steady, bitter cold, but the storms paused as if the mountain was gathering its breath before the next heavy blow, and Josephine began her lessons. Declan took her out to the barn each morning after breakfast to tend the animals. He taught her to milk a cow, guiding her hands in a way that was patient and playful. Her first attempt knocked over the bucket entirely, and she watched 3 gallons of warm, fresh milk spread across the barn floor. She expected a scolding. Instead, Declan sat down right there in the straw, laughing until his shoulders shook. "Miss Josephine Thorne," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "When I was 8 years old, I dumped 6 gallons of milk in this same barn. My mother laughed at me for a solid minute, then handed me a mop and told me the cow would make more tomorrow. The cow will make more tomorrow. Come on, let us try again." He taught her to feed the chickens, how to gather eggs without breaking them, how to approach a horse from the shoulders, never the front, never the back, how to put a halter on Willow, the old gray mare who sniffed at Josephine's palm with a skeptical nose for a full minute before deciding she could be trusted. She likes you, Declan said, surprised. I did not think she would. Willow does not like much of anyone. Josephine stroked the mare's long neck. What does it mean that she likes me? It means my mother is laughing somewhere. In the afternoon, Silas took over. He sat her down at the roll-top desk in the small study with the brass lamp lit against the gray light. He spread open 3 ledger books and showed her how the ranch ran year by year, season by season, head of cattle by head of cattle. Income from beef sold in Helena and Billings. Income from wool in the spring. Income from Rosalind's quilts, which had once brought $200 apiece in Denver. Expenses for feed, for salt, for veterinary supplies, for the Black Ridge ranch hand, who came up in summer for taxes paid to the territorial government. Every dollar accounted for in a slanted, careful hand she recognized as their father's, then in a similar hand that was Silas's own after 1869. You keep these every week. Mother did it before me. Before her, our grandmother did, when the family still lived in the Virginia mountains. It is what my side of the family does. Numbers, books, records. Your side. Silas adjusted his spectacles. There are 3 sides to our family, Josephine. My grandfather, Matthias, was the thinker. His twin brother, Josiah, was the hunter. Our grandmother, Elizabeth, was the heart. My father inherited the hunter. Everett inherited the thinker. Declan inherited, God help us, all 3 in different quantities on different days. I inherited my grandmother's love of a well-kept ledger in a quiet room full of books. He did not say, and Josephine did not ask what he had meant about grandmother Elizabeth and her twin brothers-in-law. Not yet. There was a room in this family's history that had a closed door on it, and she sensed that the door would open on its own schedule, not on hers. On the 3rd afternoon, Silas reached for a ledger with his left hand, and his sleeve slipped back. Josephine saw it then, a long, puckered scar running from the base of his thumb almost to the crook of his elbow. Pale old, precisely made. Not an accident. A deep, clean cut that had been stitched in a hurry. Silas saw her see it. He did not cover it up. Fredericksburg, he said quietly. December of 1862. I was a field surgeon's assistant, 19 years old. There was a boy from Ohio, maybe 17. A ball had gone through his thigh and was still in there. I had to cut the flesh open to reach it. My hands were shaking from the cold and the noise. The blade slipped. I cut myself to the bone. Did the boy live? He lived. He wrote me a letter every Christmas for 6 years. He died of influenza in 1868. His widow sent me his last letter. He said he was sorry for my scar, but glad that I had saved him the pain of a worse one. Silas looked down at his own hand. He flexed the fingers, slowly. I do not regret it, Josephine. Not one day. A man gets a chance in this life to pay something back to the world. That boy was my chance. The scar is a cheap price. She did not know what to say, so she said nothing. She simply placed her own hand over his for one brief second and then drew it back. He looked at her with something softer than surprise in his amber eyes. And in the evenings, Everett took her out to the woodshed. He placed the heavy double-bitted axe in her hands, and he stood behind her, and he guided her swing. The first day, her palms blistered inside the old leather gloves. The second day, the blisters bled through the gloves. The third day, he bound her hands with strips of linen and had her try again slower with a lighter hatchet until she understood what he had been telling her from the first morning. Not with your arms, Josephine. With gravity. With the weight of the axe. You do not fight the wood. You let the axe fall, your job is only to aim it. She hit a knot the 4th day, and the axe bounced back and nearly took off her foot. Everett caught her elbow before she could stumble. She felt the strength in his grip, controlled careful a man who had learned long ago exactly how much force was enough and exactly how much was too much. For one moment, their faces were 6 inches apart, and she could see the small white scar through his left eyebrow in detail, and she could see the amber flecks in his eyes that were not all the same color, some darker, some lit with gold. He stepped back first. He cleared his throat. That is enough for today. It is not enough. I want to learn. It is enough for today, Josephine. That night at supper, she noticed Declan staring at his brother across the table. Everett did not meet his eyes. Silas kept his gaze steady on his plate. She did not know what had passed between them, but she had the distinct sense that a line had been drawn, and all three brothers were now watching it. The days began to blur. She chopped firewood in the mornings with blistered hands wrapped in linen. She learned to fire a rifle in the afternoon. Everett, standing behind her on a rise above the barn, her first shot going wildly into a pine tree, her 10th shot ringing off a tin can at 40 yards. She read ledgers with Silas. She milked cows with Declan. She cooked dinner 4 nights out of 7, starting with simple things Sister Prudence had taught her, and graduating by the second week to a venison stew with dumplings that Declan declared with his hand on his heart, the finest meal ever served in the Black Ridge cabin. Finer than Mother's, Shoulders asked with a raised eyebrow. I said ever served, Declan answered. I did not say finer, I said ever served. Those are different sentences, brother. After supper, the 4 of them would gather by the fire. Silas would read aloud from whatever book they were working through. He was finishing Jane Eyre in those first weeks, and Josephine, who had only ever heard passages read by Sister Prudence, sat spellbound as the story of another orphan woman in a strange house unfolded through Silas's quiet, careful voice. Everett would work on whittling a new axe handle or mending a piece of tack. Declan would carve something small. The songbird on the windowsill, she learned, had been his work. He was making a second one this time, with its wings open for some reason he would not yet name. On the 13th evening, when the wind outside was a soft, steady presence rather than a roar, Silas closed the book and looked at her over his spectacles. Josephine, we have a question for you, all 3 of us. She set down her sewing. Go on. Everett spoke. It is only fair to ask, now that you have been under this roof 2 weeks, now that you have seen how we live and how we work, do you still intend to leave in the spring? The question hung in the warm, firelit air. She looked from one to the other to the other. Everett steady as oak, Silas thoughtful as a still pond, Declan with that quick fire behind his amber eyes waiting. I do not know yet, she answered honestly. Everett nodded. It was not a disappointed nod. It was the nod of a man who had been given an honest answer and knew enough to respect it. That is fair. I know I am not ready to say yes, she went on, choosing her words carefully. I also know I am no longer ready to say no. When I walked through that door 16 days ago, I was already packing my bag in my head to leave in April. Tonight I am not packing it. That is all I can tell you. Silas smiled his small smile. That is a great deal more than nothing, Josephine. Declan, who could not sit still for long, reached into his vest pocket and took out the small wooden songbird he had been carving. Wings open now. He set it on the table in front of her. I made this for you. Not for the windowsill, for you. My mother used to say that the canary sings not because the night is over, but because it knows the sun is coming. You have been singing, Josephine, in this house. These 2 weeks, you did not even know you were doing it, but you have. I wanted you to have it. She picked up the little bird. Cedar smooth to satin wings lifted as if about to take flight. She could feel where his thumb had pressed into the grain shaping feather by feather. Declan, her voice caught. Thank you. The next morning, she found Everett in the woodshed before dawn, splitting logs in the blue darkness. He looked up when she approached, and without a word, he took off his heavy wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was too big by a foot. It smelled of leather and pine smoke and horse. She wore it the rest of the day, and she did not tell him. The second storm came on the 18th day. It was worse than the first. Snow blew sideways for 72 hours, and when it finally eased, the drifts had risen to the eaves of the cabin on the north side. For 3 days, the 4 of them were trapped entirely indoors, with only the tunnel Declan dug to the barn permitting animal care to continue. Josephine thought she would go mad from the closeness of it. Instead, something strange happened. The cabin grew smaller, and she grew more at home in it. She cooked for them 3 meals a day. She mended Declan's torn flannel shirt on the second evening, her needle flashing in the firelight. She read aloud from Longfellow while Silas rested his eyes. She played a clumsy game of checkers with Everett, in which she beat him twice in a row, a fact that caused Declan to laugh so hard he fell backwards off his chair. "The great strategist of Gettysburg," Declan wheezed, bested by a girl from Boston who had never before in her life played the game. "I was letting her win," Everett said with great dignity. "You were not." "I was." "Brother, you were not." On the third night of that storm, very late, Josephine could not sleep. She came down the stairs in her shawl to stir the fire. She found Silas sitting in the big chair by the hearth with a book open but unread on his lap, staring into the flames. "Silas!" He looked up startled. "Forgive me, I did not hear you. Are you well?" He hesitated, then he closed the book. "Josephine, sit with me for a moment." She sat. He looked at her for a long time in the firelight before he spoke. "There is a thing you will want to know about this family before you decide anything. I have been waiting for the right moment, and this is it. We all three have been waiting. But I think you should hear it from me because I am the one who understands it best. It is a thing about our grandmother. Elizabeth." "Yes, Elizabeth." He drew a breath. "My grandmother was a beautiful young woman in the Virginia mountains in 1838. She was 19 years old. She lived near two young men who were brothers, twin brothers, fur traders, Matthias and Josiah Blackridge. Both of them loved her. Neither of them would step aside for the other. And she, for reasons that no one ever fully explained to me or my brothers, could not choose between them. She loved them both, differently, but both." Josephine sat very still. In most of the world, that would have been the end of the story. One man would have given her up, one man would have walked away, or Elizabeth would have chosen and the losing brother would have ridden off into the Appalachians and been lost. But this was not most of the world. This was a small, hidden valley in the Virginia mountains in 1838 where no minister came more than twice a year, where the nearest town was 80 miles away, where a small community of hill folk lived by their own understanding of what a family could be. And my grandmother married both brothers. In the eyes of the church, she married Matthias because that was the law. In the eyes of her community, she married both. They built one cabin. They raised 3 children together. My father Ezekiel was one of them. A daughter named Temperance. A younger son, my uncle Hiram. Elizabeth lived with her 2 husbands for 35 years. No one in that valley ever said a word against it. When she died in 1873, she was buried between them, and they lay beside her within the year, both of them. He looked into the fire. His voice was steady but quiet. "It was not a tradition, Josephine. It was one woman's choice and 2 men's choice, and a small hill community's grace in letting them live the life they had chosen. My father Ezekiel, when he grew up and came north, he fell in love with my mother Rosalind. Only her. He loved only one woman his whole life. My uncle Hiram married a widow in Pennsylvania and had 10 children with her and never loved another soul. The way my grandmother lived her life did not bind her children to do the same, but it also did not bind us not to." Silas turned to her. His amber eyes were full of firelight. "I am telling you this because you have asked, without asking, what this is, what we are. Why 3 brothers would share one letter and one bride in one ranch. We do not know exactly why, Josephine. We know only that when our mother lay dying of fever in 1869, she gathered the 3 of us around her bed, and she looked at us and she said there is a kind of love that does not always fit the shape the world expects. If you ever find a woman who can love all 3 of you, do not turn her away out of fear. Do not separate yourselves out of shame. You are my 3 blessings, and a woman who can see that is her own rare blessing. Wait for her, and if she never comes, hold the ranch together anyway. You are brothers first. Do not let the world tell you otherwise." Silas was silent for a long moment. Josephine could not speak. She died the next morning, Josephine. Our father died 4 days after. Fever took them both. We buried them side by side on the eastern ridge, and we held the promise she asked of us. For 5 years we have held it. Alone, John. We did not expect you. We did not know if we wanted to expect anyone. Everett wrote that letter a year ago in a fit of winter loneliness and then set it aside. It was Declan who posted it last August without telling either of us. By the time we knew, you had already written back. And here you are. He smiled at her, small and tired. We do not ask you to love all three of us, Josephine. We do not ask you to be anything other than honest about what you can give. But you needed to know what our mother asked of us. And you needed to know what the word family means in this cabin before you decide whether to leave in April. He closed his book. He stood. Good night, Josephine Thorne. He climbed the stairs to the brothers' room at the back of the house. She heard the door close softly. She sat alone by the fire for a long time after that. She thought of Rosalind Blackridge writing 3 sons, 3 blessings, in the margin of a Bible in a woman's careful hand in the year she had borne 3 boys at once, and named them Everett, Silas, and Declan. She thought of Elizabeth Blackridge in a hidden Virginia valley in 1838, refusing to choose between 2 men who refused to leave her. She thought of a dying woman in this very cabin 5 years ago, gathering her 3 grown sons around her and telling them not to let shame drive them apart. She thought of Horace Grimshaw's hand on her wrist in Boston. She thought of Everett's hand on her elbow at the woodshed, stepping back as soon as she was steady. She thought of Declan's carving the canary with its wings open, shaped feather by feather, by a man who knew how to be careful with small things. She thought of Silas's scar earned in a field hospital by a 19-year-old who had slipped the knife saving a stranger. And somewhere in the firelit silence, she understood a thing about herself that she had not understood an hour before. She was not afraid of them. She was afraid of how much she was not afraid of them. She banked the fire. She climbed the stairs. She opened the door of Rosalind's room and closed it behind her. And for the first time in 18 nights, she did not turn the key in the lock. She laid it down on the bedside table beside her father's silver coin and Rosalind's Bible, and she climbed into the bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, and she fell asleep listening to the sound of 3 men breathing in a room below, her 3 different rhythms woven together into one slow, steady song. The next morning, she came down the stairs, and Everett looked up from his coffee, and his amber eyes held hers for one long second, and she knew, though no one had said it, that all 3 of them had heard her not turn the lock. None of them spoke of it, but Declan at the window began to whistle a small tune she had never heard before. Silas smiled into his ledger, and Everett simply nodded at her once across the table, the way a man nods at the arrival of something he had not dared to hope for. Winter always ends, she thought, watching him. But winter, she was beginning to learn, had its own gifts along the way. And somewhere on a road 30 miles below them, in the warm parlor of a Helena hotel, a man named Cornelius Draycott was setting down a glass of brandy and instructing a hired rider to make his way to the Black Ridge Ranch as soon as the next break in the weather allowed. Draycott had waited 17 years for this chance. He was not a patient man, but he had learned patience the way a wolf learns it, by counting the days between kills. He opened a leather portfolio on the desk in front of him, and he looked at the deed of debt he had purchased from the First Bank of Helena 3 months ago. $3,000, due in full on the first day of March 1875. And beside that deed, older yellowed, creased 100 times, was a newspaper clipping from the Boston Globe of September 1858, reporting the deaths by fire of one Edmund Thorne and his wife Sarah of Lowell, Massachusetts, survived only by their 6-year-old daughter Josephine, now in the care of St. Catherine's Home for Foundling Girls. Cornelius Draycott took a slow sip of his brandy. He smiled a thin, cold smile at the empty room. He had no idea yet that the daughter of the man he had killed was at that very moment sitting by a fire on the Black Ridge Ranch, unlocking her own door for the first time in her life, and beginning slowly and without quite knowing it to fall in love. But he would find out. Very soon he would find out. And the winter which had taught Josephine Thorne how to trust was about to teach her something else entirely. It was about to teach her how to fight. The knock on the cabin door came at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. There had been a rare 3-week thaw after the second blizzard, just enough to briefly open the lower passes for a determined rider on a good horse, though no one on the mountain had expected visitors. The winter was not over. It was only catching its breath. Everett was at the table going over a seed catalog for the spring planting. Silas was at the roll-top desk in the study. Declan was down at the barn checking on a cow that was 2 weeks from calving. And Josephine was at the hearth stirring a pot of bean and ham soup that was beginning to smell like supper. They all four of them looked toward the door at the same instant. "Stay back from the window," Everett said quietly. He rose and took the Winchester down from its pegs above the door. He worked the lever once smoothly, a chambered round sliding into place with a sound Josephine had come to know was the sound of her new life preparing for trouble. He opened the door 6 inches. A man stood on the porch in a long wool overcoat of the finest black broadcloth. His boots were polished to a dull shine despite the snow. A silver chain ran from the top button of his vest to a gold watch in his vest pocket. He was perhaps 50 years old, tall, narrow, clean-shaven. His eyes were the pale gray of creek ice in February, and they were looking at Everett the way a butcher looks at a side of beef. "Mr. Everett Blackridge," the man said, "I apologize for the unannounced visit. I would have sent word, but the telegraph lines have been down since the last storm. My name is Cornelius Draycott. I have come from Helena on a matter of pressing business." "State your business from the porch, Mr. Draycott. I do not know you." "I think you will want me inside, sir. The business concerns the future of this ranch." Behind Everett, Josephine felt something cold settle in her stomach. The name had landed in the room like a pistol set down on a table. Cornelius Draycott. Draycott. A name she had never heard in her life. And yet something about it pulled at a memory she could not quite reach. A letter in Sister Prudence's office. A voice saying a name she had been too young to fully hear. Everett stepped aside. He did not lower the rifle. He simply set it across the table within arm's reach. "Come in." Draycott entered with the slow, careful grace of a man who had walked into many rooms and had always left them in better condition than he had found them. He removed his leather gloves one finger at a time. He unbuttoned his overcoat. His pale gray eyes swept the cabin and took in every detail in one long, practiced look. The books, the tools, the hearth, the pot of soup, and then last of all, Josephine. He smiled at her. It was a smile that did not reach his eyes. "And this must be the young lady the whole town has been speaking of. Miss Thorne, I believe. The mail-order bride from Boston." Josephine did not answer. She did not trust her voice. "Miss Thorne is a guest in this house." Everett said, his voice flat. "State your business, Draycott." Cornelius Draycott drew a leather portfolio from the inside of his coat. He laid it on the oak table. He opened it. He produced 3 documents, one after another, setting them down with the deliberate care of a man laying out playing cards. "3 months ago," Draycott said, "I purchased an outstanding promissory note from the First Bank of Helena. The note was originally taken out against this estate in the autumn of 1870 by the court-appointed administrator the year after your father's passing to cover probate costs, back taxes, and repairs to the north barn after the flood of that spring. The note has been accruing interest at 8% compounded annually since it was first issued." Silas had come out of the study. He stood silent behind his brother, his spectacles in his hand, his jaw set. "The balance today, gentlemen, with interest stands at $3,050. The note matures on the first day of March of 1875. That is a little under 3 months from today. If the note is not paid in full on that date in gold or silver currency or a certified bank draft, the ranch, the improvements, the livestock, and the water rights of Silver Creek revert to the note holder. That is myself." He smiled his thin smile again. "I have come to inform you of this personally as a courtesy and to inquire whether you are in a position to begin discussions about a settlement. I am a reasonable man. I would accept a partial payment in a transfer of the water rights alone in satisfaction of the debt. You could keep the cabin, you could keep your cattle, you would simply no longer control the creek. The water rights, Everett said slowly, are the ranch. Without the creek, there is no ranch. That is a matter of perspective, Mr. Blackridge. At that moment, the back door opened, and Declan came in with snow on his shoulders and cold in his cheeks. He stopped the instant he saw the stranger. His amber eyes went first to Everett, then to the rifle on the table, then to Draycott's portfolio, and his face hardened into something Josephine had not yet seen on it. "Who is this?" "A creditor brother," Silas answered softly. "Calling on a note our father's estate took out after his passing. It is legitimate. I remember Phelan, the administrator. The paperwork will be in our own files somewhere." Declan stepped fully into the room. He did not remove his coat. He did not take his eyes off Draycott. Draycott closed his portfolio slowly. He looked around the room one more time. His gray eyes lingered for another long moment on Josephine, and she felt something crawl up her spine. Not fear, something worse than fear. Something that felt almost like recognition, though she could not have said why. "Miss Thorne," Draycott said softly, "you are a long way from Boston." She found her voice. "I am. A beautiful journey, I imagine. A cold one. A wise young woman is careful about the arrangements she permits herself to fall into out here. The territorial governor, I am told, has lately taken an interest in the domestic conditions of certain households in remote counties. An investigation, rumors of immoral cohabitation, the sort of thing that could result in charges against the men of the household and the deportation of any woman found to be, shall we say, irregularly attached. A grand jury in Helena would look very closely at a household of 3 unmarried men and 1 unmarried woman, whatever the arrangement claimed to be. I mention this only as a friend, Miss Thorne, a friend who worries for your reputation." Declan took a step forward. Everett's hand closed on his brother's shoulder before the step could become a second. "Draycott," Everett's voice was so quiet it made the room colder. "You have delivered your message. Now leave my house. And do not ever again speak to Miss Thorne directly. You address your business to me. If I hear that you have approached her in town in a letter in any manner whatsoever, I will ride to Helena myself and I will find you and we will discuss your manners at length. Are we clear?" Cornelius Draycott smiled one last time. He buttoned his overcoat. He pulled on his gloves, one finger at a time. "We are clear, Mr. Blackridge. Good evening, Miss Thorne." He inclined his head to her. "Boston, such a sad place in autumn. Ashes and rain, as I recall. Ashes and rain." And then he was gone. The door closed behind him. The 4 of them stood in a silence so absolute that Josephine could hear the soup simmering on the hearth and the wind under the eaves and her own heartbeat in her ears. It was Declan who finally broke it. "Ashes and rain! What in God's name was that?" But Josephine had gone cold in a way no fire would reach, because she knew what it was. She did not know how she knew, but she knew. The word ashes spoken in that thin, cold voice had opened a door inside her that had been sealed shut for 16 years. And behind that door was a 6-year-old girl in a nightdress being carried through smoke by a neighbor woman. And behind the neighbor woman in the burning doorway of a Lowell, Massachusetts mill that had been half owned by her father was a tall, narrow silhouette of a man in a long coat walking away without looking back. She sat down hard in the chair by the hearth. Her hands were shaking. Silas reached her first. He knelt beside the chair. "Josephine, what is it?" "I have to tell you something." Her voice was not her own. "I have to tell all 3 of you something, and I have to tell it now before I lose my nerve." Everett set down the Winchester. Declan pulled up a chair. Silas stayed where he was on one knee beside her. 3 amber-eyed faces turned fully toward her, waiting. "My father," she said, "Edmund Thorne. He was the half-owner of a textile mill in Lowell, Massachusetts. In the year 1858, that mill burned to the ground. My father and my mother were inside. They did not come out. I was 6 years old. A neighbor carried me to the street. The fire took the whole block. I was told for 16 years that it had been an accident, a gas lamp, a piece of cotton waste, that these things happened in mills. Josephine. Let me finish, please. Sister Prudence told me 2 weeks before I left Boston that my father had had a business partner, a man she knew only from a single letter my father had written her years before, asking her to keep the letter safe in case anything happened to him. The partner's name in that letter was given only as Mr. Ash. Sister Prudence said my father had written that Mr. Ash had been embezzling from the mill for 2 years, that he had threatened to burn the place down rather than be discovered, and that if anything ever happened to Edmund and Sarah Thorne, Sister Prudence was to see that I was cared for, and that the letter was to be given to the proper authorities. The letter lost. In the chaos after the fire, the orphanage took me in, but no one came forward about any letter. Sister Prudence showed it to a lawyer. The lawyer said there was no case without the partner's full name. Mr. Ash alone meant nothing. The investigation into the fire concluded it was accidental, and I grew up and I never heard of Mr. Ash again. She lifted her eyes to the three brothers. Until tonight, when a man named Cornelius Draycott stood in this cabin and spoke the word ashes directly to me. And when he did, I remembered. I remembered a tall man in a long coat walking away from the front of the burning mill. I did not remember his face. I was 6 years old, but I remembered the walk. And I watched Cornelius Draycott walk to his horse just now through that window, and it was the same walk. It was the same walk, Everett. God help me, it was the same walk. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Silas stood up. He went to the study. They heard him pulling ledger books off a shelf, heavy old ones, leather-bound. He came back carrying 3 of them. He set them on the oak table. Our father, he said quietly, kept detailed records of every business dealing he ever had, every transaction, every partnership, every investment. I have read these books many times. I have read them for taxes, for audits, for my own curiosity about the man who raised me. Josephine, I want you to come look at something with me. She went to the table. The brothers gathered around. Silas opened the oldest ledger, 1850 to 1860. He turned the pages slowly, his finger running down columns of entries. In 1856, he said, my father made a small investment in a northern textile concern. He never spoke of it much. He lost the money in 1858, and he treated it as a lesson learned. I always assumed it was a bank failure. Listen to what he wrote. Silas read aloud. January the 4th, 1856, $2,000 invested in Thorne & Company, a textile mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, at the recommendation of Mr. John Hardwick of New York. Edmund Thorne is the senior partner and principal operator. A junior partner by the name of Lucius Ashforth holds a 1/4 interest. Thorne is a sober and intelligent man. I have reservations about Ashforth. His accounts do not reconcile on my first review. I have said nothing to Thorne yet. Silas turned a page. June the 8th, 1857, wrote to Edmund Thorne in Lowell regarding the ongoing irregularities in the junior partner's accounts. Advised him to review them personally. Thorne responded that he had already begun his own investigation. He believes Ashforth has been diverting funds to a second business in Boston. Thorne has engaged a discreet auditor. He fears Ashforth is dangerous and has asked me to say nothing of this in writing beyond this letter. I will respect his wishes. Silas turned another page. September the 3rd, 1858. Devastating news by the Morning Post. The Thorne Mill in Lowell has burned. Edmund and Sarah Thorne are both dead. Their daughter, a child of 6, has survived and been placed in the care of the Catholic orphanage of St. Catherine in South Boston. Lucius Ashforth, the junior partner, has disappeared along with the contents of the mill's safe and all books of account. The authorities are calling it an accident. I do not believe them. Ashforth was on the verge of exposure. He has done this. Silas looked up from the ledger. His amber eyes were steady. September the 10th, 1858. I have written to the authorities in Lowell and in Boston, naming Ashforth as a suspect. They have replied that without documentation, no investigation can proceed. Ashforth has vanished. I have also written privately to Sister Prudence of St. Catherine's through an intermediary. I have arranged for a sum of $40 per annum to be paid anonymously to her for the care and education of the child, Josephine Thorne, for as long as I am able. I owe Edmund Thorne this much. He was a good man and I did not save him. I will not fail his daughter. The room was silent. Josephine could not breathe. She stood at the table with her hand pressed against her mouth. Silas turned more pages. Years passed under his finger. 1866. The annual payment continues through the intermediary, $40 per year. The child is now 14 and still at the orphanage. Sister Prudence reports that she is intelligent, devout, and shows a remarkable gift for needlework. I am glad to hear it. 1869. His voice caught. He cleared his throat. 1869. I am writing this entry knowing my own time is short. The fever has taken Rosalind, and it is coming for me. I have instructed my sons, Everett, Silas, and Declan, to continue the annual payment to St. Catherine's for the care of Josephine Thorne, if they can afford it. They do not know who she is. They do not know why I pay it. I will tell them nothing. It is a debt of honor, and honor does not need to be explained to be paid. If any of them ever finds himself in Boston in the years to come, I would ask only that he look in on her if he can do so without disrupting her life. She is the last piece of a promise I made to a dead friend. Silas closed the ledger. Josephine's knees gave way. Declan caught her before she could fall. He lowered her into a chair. Our father, Everett said slowly, sent money to St. Catherine's for 16 years. For you, without ever telling us why. $40 a year. Silas's voice was hoarse. For 16 years, $640. Paid out of this ranch. Every year. And in 1869, on his deathbed, he told us only to continue the payment. He never explained. He told us it was a debt of honor. Did you continue it? Josephine whispered. We continued it until 1872. Silas looked down. The flood took the North Barn. We fell into debt. We wrote to St. Catherine's and apologized and asked for a reprieve. Sister Prudence wrote back and said the child had grown into a young woman of great self-reliance and that she would not take our last dollar. She said she would manage. She said to send payment, again only when we could. We sent $20 in 1873. We sent nothing in 1874. We never knew your name, Josephine. We paid out of obedience. Our father had asked us to pay, so we paid. Declan knelt in front of her chair. He took both her hands in his. Josie, listen to me. My father kept you alive. For 16 years, without ever telling us who you were, my father kept food in your mouth and a roof over your head in that orphanage. And the man who killed your parents, the man who took everything from you, is the same man who just walked through that door, Lucius Ashforth, Cornelius Draycott. He changed his name. He came west. He used the money he stole from your father to buy land and influence. And now he is trying to take our ranch. He is trying to take me, Josephine whispered. He is trying to finish what he started. He is trying to take the ranch because of what my father might have written, because of what a child might have seen, because somewhere in those books, there is enough evidence to hang him. Everett placed his hand on her shoulder. Josephine, look at me. She looked up. We are not fighting for a piece of land anymore. Do you understand? We are fighting for justice, for your father, for your mother, for the promise our father kept for 16 years without a word of explanation. A man keeps his word. Our father taught us that. And tonight we have just learned the last promise he made in this life was a promise that brought you to our door. That is not coincidence. That is not chance. That is something older and bigger than either. And we will not lose this ranch to the man who killed your family. Declan stood. His face was bright with a fury she had not yet seen in him. $3,050. Less than 3 months. Brothers, We are not paupers. We have cattle to sell in the spring. We have the timber rights on the north face. We have our mother's quilts in the cedar chest. The spring cattle sale will not happen until May, Silas said, already running numbers in his head. Too late. The timber rights cannot be liquidated without a buyer, and there is no buyer in Helena in February. Mother's quilts. There are 6 of them in the cedar chest. If they brought 200 apiece, that is $1,200. Not enough. Show me, Josephine said. What? The quilts. Show me your mother's quilts. Now. Declan was up the stairs in an instant. He came back down carrying the cedar chest in his arms. He set it on the table. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, wrapped in muslin, lay 6 quilts. Josephine lifted them out one by one. Bear's paw, log cabin, flying geese, grandmother's garden, Irish chain, Ohio star. She unfolded each one on the long table. The workmanship was extraordinary. 400 patches on the Ohio star alone. Stitches so fine and even that they disappeared into the fabric. Each quilt was a small universe of color and precision made by a woman who had learned her craft in Philadelphia and had kept practicing it by firelight on a Montana mountain for 15 winters. Josephine ran her hands over the bear's paw. She touched the binding. She counted the stitches per inch. She examined the batting by pressing her cheek against the surface. Sister Prudence taught me, she said quietly. From the time I was 10, I have made over 60 quills for St. Catherine's. These are finer than anything I have ever made. But I know the technique. I understand every stitch your mother used. I can make quilts of this quality, not as well as hers, but close enough. She looked up at the 3 brothers. I can make 9 more before March the 1st. If I work 14 hours a day from now until the end of February. If I sew every waking minute that I am not eating or sleeping. If we pool all the good fabric in this house and perhaps buy more from Hattie Whitaker in Silver Creek. 9 quilts of this caliber sold at a good auction in Helena might bring $300 to $400 a piece. $3,600 at the minimum, enough to pay the debt, enough to save the ranch. Josephine, Everett's voice was rough. That is not work. That is self-destruction. 9 quilts in less than 3 months. You will not survive it. I will survive it. Your eyes, your hands, the weight you will lose. Everett Blackridge. She stood up from the chair. The shock of the last hour had drained out of her, and something else had taken its place. Something she had not known she had. Something her father had left her when he had pressed the silver coin into her palm on the morning of his last day alive. I have been carrying this fight for 16 years without knowing I was carrying it. Cornelius Draycott walked into this cabin tonight, and he smiled at me. He smiled. He thought he could come here and frighten me out of the mountains he stole with my father's blood. He miscalculated. I am not a frightened girl in a Boston orphanage anymore. I am a woman on a Montana ranch with 3 men at her back. And I am going to sew. I am going to sew until my fingers bleed. And I am going to take the money my needle earns, and I am going to lay it on the table in Helena on the 1st of March in front of Cornelius Draycott, and I am going to watch his face when he realizes he has not only failed, he has been defeated by the daughter he thought he had buried in ashes. Silas silent. Silas was the first to move. He walked to her. He took her hand very gently in both of his over the ledger that bore his father's confession and his father's promise. He raised her hand to his lips. He kissed her knuckles once, a small, grave, courtly gesture from another century. Then we will help you sew, Josephine, every one of us. Every hour we are not working the ranch. I will cut fabric, Declan will thread needles, Everett will ride to Silver Creek for every yard of good cotton Hattie Whitaker has in her store. And we will carry 9 quilts down that mountain on the 1st of March if we have to carry them on our backs through snow up to our waists. We will carry them. Will we not, brothers? We will carry them, Everett said. We will carry them, Declan said. Josephine looked at the 3 of them. 3 pairs of amber eyes. Three faces that had been strangers to her 10 weeks ago. Three men who were now somehow without her, having quite noticed the moment of the shift her family. More family than she had known in 16 years. More family than she had ever dared imagine she could have again. "Then let us begin," she said. They began that very night. Silas pulled every bolt of good cotton and linen from the household stores and laid them out on the table. Declan sharpened the sewing scissors on a whetstone until the blades sang. Everett brought down the lamp oil from the cellar so that Josephine could work by light after supper without rationing. By midnight, she had cut the first pieces for a double wedding ring quilt, the most complex pattern she knew the one Rosalind Blackridge had not made, and that Josephine felt for reasons she could not yet explain had been waiting for her to make. She worked until 2 in the morning and then fell asleep at the table with the needle in her hand. Declan carried her up to her bed. She woke at dawn and she worked again. So the winter changed. The third blizzard of the season struck 2 days after Dracott's visit. For 5 nights, the wind beat the cabin like a fist. The four of them barely noticed. Josephine sat at the long oak table by the lamp, and the fire and the needle never stopped. Silas sat across from her, cutting pattern pieces from the bolts of cotton Everett had brought back from Hattie Whitaker's store, his spectacles slipping down his nose, his precise hands laying out the shapes with the care of a surgeon. Declan threaded needle after needle, sorting thread by color, keeping Josephine's water glass full, her tea hot, her shoulders wrapped in Everett's heavy wool coat when the cold crept in through the window. Everett did the ranch work of 3 men. He rose at 4 in the morning to break the ice in the water troughs, feed the cattle muck, the stalls. He returned at 9 to find Josephine already at work and Silas already cutting and Declan already threading. He would eat the breakfast Josephine had set aside for him, and then he would ride the fence line or chop 3 cords of wood or carry in the supplies Silas needed. At night, he would sit at the other end of the table with a whittling knife and a piece of curly maple, and he would not speak much, but his presence was a kind of steadiness the room needed. By the end of the first week, Josephine had finished the first quilt. A log cabin done in browns and reds and ivory, the stitches close and even. 8 more to go. By the end of the second week, she had finished the second. Flying geese in blues and whites and gold. The fingers of her right hand were stained with needle pricks, and she had developed a small callus on the side of her thumb where the needle slipped through. She did not care. On the 9th evening of the work, Declan came in from the barn with his face drawn. "We lost 3 head." Everett looked up. "How?" "I do not know. They were fine at dawn. They were dead by dusk. The Hereford heifer, the old roan steer, the pregnant cow, the one Silas said was 2 weeks from calving. I pulled the calf, but she was already gone. It did not survive. Something in the water, Everett. I am sure of it." Everett stood up slowly. He laid down his whittling. "Where are they now?" "I dragged them out behind the barn. I wanted you to look." The 2 of them went out with the lantern. Silas went with them, pulling on his coat. Josephine sat alone at the table with her needle, and for the first time since the work had begun, the needle stopped. They came back an hour later, stamping snow off their boots, silent. Everett hung his coat on the peg. He turned to Josephine. "The water troughs have been salted. There was a bitter crust on the east trough that did not come from any salt block of ours. Someone came up here in the last storm. Someone put something in our water. Poison. Arsenic, most likely. It is the rancher's poison. You can buy it at any feed store in Helena for pennies. 3 head of cattle in 1 day means he meant to kill more. We are lucky it was only 3. If Declan had not noticed them staggering at noon and separated the sick from the rest of the herd, we could have lost 30. Josephine set down her needle. "He is trying to bleed you. He cannot take the ranch by the 1st of March if you are already too poor to pay." "He is doing more than that," Silas said quietly, hanging his spectacles on a hook. "He is making a point. He is showing us he can reach us even in the winter, even with the passes closed. He has men in Silver Creek, Josephine. He has had them there since November, watching the road, waiting for a break in the weather. They rode up in the last thaw before the 3rd storm. That is the only way this was done. Someone we do not know is sleeping in Hattie Whitaker's town tonight, thinking he has struck us a hard blow and can strike another. Declan's amber eyes were burning. Tomorrow, we ride to Silver Creek. We find out who. We make it clear that if any man poisons our water or our cattle or our women, he will not be drawing another breath on a Montana mountain. No, Everett said. Declan turned on his brother. Everett, no, not yet. We are not murderers, Declan. If we ride into Silver Creek and kill some hired hand of Draycott's, we play Draycott's game. He will have the sheriff, the territorial court, the newspapers, and the grand jury all on his side within a week. He wants us to lose our heads. We are not going to lose our heads. We are going to sew. We are going to carry 9 quilts down that mountain on March the 1st. We are going to lay $3,050 on a table in Helena in front of Cornelius Draycott, and then we are going to hand the territorial marshal everything my father wrote in those ledgers about Lucius Ashforth. And then, and only then, we will watch him hang. Declan was breathing hard, but he did not argue. After a long moment, he nodded once. All right, brother, your way. But if any of those men comes near this cabin, near our herd, near Josie, they do not ride out again. Are we agreed on that? Agreed. Josephine picked up the needle. She resumed her work. The hand that held it was steadier than it had been a moment before. Something in her had hardened, and she did not think it would soften again soon. On the 20th evening of the sewing, Silas placed the second ledger in front of her. Thinner, older, 1840 to 1850. I want you to see this too. I should have shown you before. This is our father's first ledger from before he came west. The page for August of 1848. Look at the entry. She looked. In Ezekiel Blackridge's younger hand, the writing of a man not yet 30, she read, August the 12th, 1848. Lent at no interest the sum of $50 to Edmund Thorne, a young mill foreman of Lowell, Massachusetts, on the strength of his word alone. He wishes to become partner in a small textile concern and lacks the final capital. He has a new wife, Sarah, and expects a child by spring. A diligent young man. I have given him the silver $50 from my pocket as a token of friendship on the understanding that it shall be returned to me on the day of his first profit. I do not expect to see it again. I do not need to. Josephine stopped breathing. She reached into the small pouch at her waist. She drew out the worn silver $50 dated 1848 that Sister Prudence had placed in her palm in Boston 7 weeks ago. This one. Silas closed his eyes. He did not open them for a long moment. Our father, in 1848, gave your father the money to buy into that mill, with a coin from his pocket as a token. Your father never returned it. He kept it. He gave it to you on the morning he died. Sister Prudence kept it for 16 years. You carried it across the country, and you put it on this table tonight. Everett had come to stand behind her. She felt his hand rest lightly on the back of her chair. Josephine, he said, this is not a ranch you stumbled onto by accident. This is a debt our father started 26 years ago, and we are going to finish it together. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was level. Then let us finish it. She worked harder after that. She worked until her eyes burned in the lamplight and her fingers cramped into hooks, and she could not tell in the mornings whether her hands were her own or somebody else's. She slept 4 hours, then 5. She ate when Declan put food in her hand and forgot whether she had eaten when he turned his back. She finished the 3rd quilt, the 4th, the 5th. In late January, on a clear, cold evening, between storms, Everett came in from the barn and found her alone at the table. Silas was writing letters in the study. Declan was checking the heifers. The two of them were alone for the first time in weeks. He set a cup of coffee beside her elbow. He did not sit down. Josephine, Everett, may I say something to you that I should have said weeks ago? She set down the needle. She turned in her chair to look at him. Yes. He was quiet for a long time. His amber eyes held hers. Then he drew the dog tag out of his vest pocket, the one old Ezra had sent back with her, and he laid it on the table between them. I have worn this on a cord around my neck since I was 19. I carried it through Gettysburg. I lost it in Ezra Whitaker's pasture. I never expected to see it again. And then one night in November, a stranger from Boston walked into my house and handed it back to me. I did. Josephine, I am not a man of pretty speeches. Silas is the one with the books and the poetry. Declan is the one with the warm words and the carved birds. I am the one with the axe and the rifle and the list of chores that never gets shorter. But I have been watching you work at this table for 8 weeks. I have watched your hands bleed and heal and bleed again. I have watched you go without sleep to save a ranch that was not even yours 12 weeks ago. I have watched you become the center of this house in a way I did not know was possible. And I need to tell you something. Whatever happens in Helena, whether we win or we lose, whether the quilts bring $3,000 or $300, I am not letting you go back east. Not if you want to stay. Not if there is any corner of your heart that wants to stay. I will not ask you to love 3 men. I will not ask you to love even one. I am only telling you that this ranch, this winter, this fire, this table, these brothers, they are yours if you want them, for as long as you want them. That is what I came to say. She stood up from the chair. She was smaller than him by more than a foot. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. Everett Blackridge, I was going to tell you the same thing tonight. I have been trying to tell you for a week. He lifted his hand slowly as if waiting for her to stop him. She did not stop him. He placed his palm against her cheek, the calloused hand that had gripped a saber at Gettysburg, the hand that had split 10,000 logs, the hand that had caught her elbow at the woodshed and had stepped back so carefully. He leaned down. He kissed her. Once, briefly, on the forehead, not the mouth, the way a man kisses a woman he intends to spend the rest of his life earning the right to kiss properly. I will wait, he said, until Helena, until the ranch is safe, until you have chosen freely without fear behind the choice. Everett, I have chosen. I know, and I thank God for it. But we will do this properly. We will do this the way my father would have done it. I will speak to Silas. I will speak to Declan. They will speak to you in their own way in their own time. And in April, if you still want us, all 3 of us, we will ride down to Silver Creek and we will find Reverend Finch and we will do this the way it ought to be done. She pressed her face against his chest. She heard his heart beating under the wool of his shirt, slow and steady as the house itself. Winter always ends, she whispered. It does, and spring is coming for us, Josephine Thorne. Hold on. The 6th quilt was finished on the 2nd of February, the 7th on the 12th, the 8th on the 22nd. Josephine had lost 10 pounds. Her eyes had dark hollows beneath them. Her fingers were wrapped in linen strips under the gloves. But she did not stop. On the evening of February the 26th, 3 days before they were to leave for Helena, she set the last stitch in the double wedding ring quilt, the 9th and finest. Red and cream and pale gold, 2 interlocking rings of patchwork, the traditional pattern that a bride made for her wedding bed. She held it up to the firelight. Declan, who had been carving by the hearth, looked up. His eyes filled. Josie, it is the finest thing I have ever seen. It is for us, she said simply. If we come home from Helena with a ranch still in our names, this one stays. This one is, or bed. He did not say anything. He only took her hand and pressed his forehead against her knuckles. They left before dawn on the morning of February the 27th. It was a gamble. Silas had been watching the sky. He believed they had 3 days of clear weather before the next storm, which should just be enough. He was wrong. The 4th blizzard struck on the afternoon of the first day. It came out of the north faster than any of them had ever seen a storm move, and by sundown they were in it up to their chests, leading the wagon horses by the bridles because the wagon would not move in the drifts. They ran the wagon into a hollow behind a line of pines and they pitched their canvas there and they waited. For 2 days, they sat in that canvas and watched their supplies run low. They fed the horses the last of the oats. They burned the last of the lamp oil. Josephine sewed the binding on the last quilt by the weakest possible firelight because she refused to let the delay stop her. On the fourth morning, the wind died. They hitched the horses and they pushed on. They lost a wheel at Wolf Creek Pass. Everett and Declan lay in the snow for 3 hours repairing it with baling wire and prayer. They met 2 men on the trail near Cottonwood Flats who claimed to be trappers but carried no furs, and Silas recognized one of them as a man he had seen in the saloon at Silver Creek the week Draycott had come to the ranch. Everett rode past them with the Winchester across his saddle, and the 2 men did not follow. On the 5th morning, wolves came down to the camp. 6 of them, gray shadows in the blue dawn circling. Declan fired once into the air and they scattered, but Josephine did not sleep well again until they saw the smoke of Helena rising on the horizon. They rode into Helena at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of March, 6 hours before the note came due. Martha Patterson, who owned the largest mercantile in Helena, had known Rosalind Blackridge 20 years before. When Josephine walked into her shop with the 9 quilts stacked on a dolly behind her, Martha Patterson stopped in the middle of counting a customer's change. She did not finish counting. She walked to the quilts, and she laid her hand on the top one, and she lifted a corner and she looked at the stitching. She looked up at Josephine with tears in her eyes. "Who taught you this?" "Sister Prudence of St. Catherine's, Boston, and then the quilts of Rosalind Blackridge. I have been studying hers for 4 months." "Child." Martha Patterson pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve. "Rosalind was my friend. I bought 5 of her quilts in this shop before the fever took her. I know this stitch. I know the hand that made it. I know the hand that learned from it. I am going to do something for you this afternoon that I have not done in 10 years. I am going to open the ballroom at the Continental Hotel, and I am going to invite every gold miner and railroad man and cattleman's wife within 50 miles, and I am going to auction these quilts the way they auction horses in Kentucky." The auction began at 2 o'clock. By 3, the Continental Ballroom was full. Crystal chandeliers above velvet drapes along the walls, and standing against the back wall in a plain navy dress, with her honey blonde hair pinned up, Josephine Thorne, daughter of Edmund Thorne, with 3 tall, amber-eyed men at her back. Cornelius Draycott walked in at 3:15. He had ridden fast from his hotel on the other side of town. He was flushed. He had 3 hired men with him. He took a seat in the front row. He did not look at Josephine. He looked only at the quilts. The first quilt sold for $175, the second for $200, the third for $225, the fourth for $275. When the 5th quilt, the Ohio Star, was held up, Draycott began to bid. Low, clumsy, designed to suppress enthusiasm. He got the bid stalled at $150, and then a woman rose from the 3rd row, silver-haired, gowned in Philadelphia silk, diamond rings on both hands. "I am Adelaide Fairchild of the Philadelphia Museum of American Needlework. I will pay $400 for that quilt." The room gasped. "450, called a mining wife. 500, Adelaide Fairchild answered without turning. 510, Draycott spat. 600, Adelaide Fairchild said calmly. The gavel fell. After that, the room could not bid fast enough. The 6th quilt sold for $350, the 7th for $425, the 8th for $500. The last quilt, the double wedding ring, was the one Josephine had said was theirs. But when the auctioneer lifted it, she felt Everett's hand close briefly on her shoulder and she nodded. Bidding began at $200. It climbed past $600 within a minute. Draycott bid $700. Adelaide Fairchild bid $800. And then a new voice from the back of the room. $1,000. The entire ballroom turned. A silver-haired gentleman stood at the rear of the room, leaning on a silver-top cane. Beside him stood Sheriff Rowan Calloway of Silver Creek, and beside the sheriff stood a United States Marshal wearing a tin star. My name, the silver-haired gentleman said to the silence, is Thaddeus Thorne. I am the elder brother of Edmund Thorne of Lowell, Massachusetts, who was murdered in the fire of September the 3rd, 1858. And I am here tonight to reclaim my niece and to see a man hang. Cornelius Draycott stood up. Three of the sheriff's deputies stepped in front of the ballroom doors. The marshal walked down the center aisle. Lucius Ashforth, he said, you are under arrest for arson for the murders of Edmund and Sarah Thorne, for fraud in the territory of Massachusetts, and for the attempted fraudulent seizure of the Black Ridge Ranch by means of forged bank paper and the deliberate poisoning of livestock. You will come with me now. Draycott reached for the small pistol in his vest. He did not make it. Declan Blackridge crossed the distance in 3 long strides and took the pistol out of his hand the way a father takes a knife from a child. The marshal clapped the irons on. The auction ended. The final tally, counted by Martha Patterson herself at the Continental's front desk, came to $3,750. After her 10% commission, $3,375. The debt was $3,050. They walked into the First Bank of Helena at 5 minutes past 5, 55 minutes before closing, and they paid the note in full. The clerk handed Silas the original deed of debt marked paid. Silas folded it carefully and put it inside his coat. That night at the Continental Hotel at a private supper table, Thaddeus Thorne told them the rest of the story. He had left Boston for San Francisco in 1851 after a quarrel with his father. He had lost touch with his younger brother Edmund. He had read of the fire in a San Francisco paper in 1858 and had believed the entire family dead. For 16 years he had carried that grief. 3 months ago, Sister Prudence's letter had reached him through a chain of intermediaries, and he had hired Pinkerton men, and the Pinkerton men had traced Lucius Ashforth to the Montana Territory under the name Cornelius Draycott, and the Pinkerton men had also found the one piece of evidence that no lawyer had been able to find in 16 years. A man in Lowell who had seen Ashforth with a can of kerosene on the mill floor 2 hours before the fire. A witness who had been afraid to speak while Ashforth was at liberty, but who had been willing to speak once he was behind bars. You will have your Justice Josephine, her uncle said, taking her hand across the table. Your father's estate, what can be recovered of it, will be returned to you. $25,000 at minimum. And whatever else you want of mine, you will have. I am an old man. I have no children of my own. You are my brother's only child. You are my daughter now in every way that matters. Josephine looked at him through tears. She looked at the 3 Blackridge brothers sitting around that table. She looked at the silver coin her father had pressed into her palm 26 years ago, which Ezekiel Blackridge had first given him, which had come home at last. Uncle Thaddeus, she said, I have a home. I have 3 men who have stood by me through a winter that would have broken me if I had been alone. What I want from my father's estate, I want given to St. Catherine's, to Sister Prudence, to every girl who ever slept in that dormitory, wondering what the world had in store for her. That is where it belongs. Thaddeus Thorne smiled a slow, warm smile. Then that is where it will go. They were married on the 12th of April in a mountain meadow still patched with late snow, but wild with lupine and Indian paintbrush and the first yellow balsam root of the spring. Reverend Obadiah Finch came up from Silver Creek with his Bible. Hattie Whitaker and old Ezra came. Sheriff Calloway came. Martha Patterson came. Sister Prudence, frail but fierce, had traveled by train from Boston at Thaddeus Thorne's expense, and she stood with her hand on Josephine's arm as the vows were spoken. Thaddeus Thorne gave the bride away. In the eyes of the territorial law and the Methodist Church, Josephine Thorne married Everett Blackridge that afternoon. In the eyes of the small company gathered in the mountain meadow, she was joined to 3 men, each of whom spoke to her privately before the ceremony. Everett pressed the silver $50 into her palm and said, I will guard you from every storm that comes. Silas placed a slim silver ring on her finger beside the wedding band, a ring he had made from a coin he had flattened in his own fire, and said, I will listen to you every day of our lives, and I will build you a library of every book you ever wanted to read. Declan knelt in the wildflowers and placed a carved wooden songbird on a braided cord around her neck and said, "I will make you laugh on the days when laughing is the hardest thing in the world." That night, after the others had left, Everett carried her across the threshold of the cabin and closed the door. Outside, the last snow of the long winter turned to rain on the porch roof. In the morning, the first buds were breaking open on the aspen trees, and the long, cruel winter had ended at last. 30 years passed. It is 1905 now, and the Black Ridge Ranch covers 2,000 acres of the Beartooth Valley. The herd is 400 head. The Black Ridge Quilting Company that Josephine founded in 1878 employs 32 women, many of them former orphans from St. Catherine's, in a long, bright building behind the main cabin. Her quilts have hung in the Smithsonian Institution. A double wedding ring she made in 1882 was given as a state gift to the wife of a visiting British ambassador. The Philadelphia Museum of American Needlework, where Adelaide Fairchild served as director until her death in 1891, keeps 3 Black Ridge quilts on permanent display with a brass plaque beneath. Ethan Blackridge, the oldest son, is 29 and manages the ranch. Rose and Lily, the twin daughters, are 26, Rose married to the doctor, and Helena Lily, the school teacher at Silver Creek. Young Samuel, named for Sister Prudence's own brother, is 22 and has just come home from the University of Chicago, where Thaddeus Thorne paid his tuition until the day the old man died. There are 7 grandchildren. The oldest is 8. The youngest was born last winter. The 3 brothers are 62. Everett walks slower now, though he still rises at 4 every morning. Silas wears his spectacles full-time and has published 3 books on the history of the Western frontier. Declan still rides every day, and he is teaching the grandchildren how to halter a horse, which is, he says, the only skill a man truly needs. Josephine is 53. There is silver in her honey blonde hair now. The hollows under her eyes are gone. Her hands are still quick with a needle. On the front porch of the cabin, on a late autumn evening, she stands with Everett's arm around her waist, Silas's hand on her shoulder. Declan beside her, watching her children and grandchildren chase each other across the meadow in the last gold light of the day. "Do you ever regret it, Josie?" Silas asked quietly. The same question one of them asked her every autumn, the same question she always answered. She thought of Boston rain on orphanage windows. She thought of Horace Grimshaw's hand on her wrist. She thought of a 6-year-old girl in a nightdress being carried through smoke. Then she thought of 3 amber-eyed brothers opening a door on a November afternoon. She thought of a silver half-dollar coming home. She thought of a canary carved from cedar, with its wings lifted to catch a sun it knew was coming. "Not one day," she said. "Not 1 hour, not one single minute of 30 years. A breeze moved through the pines. Somewhere up the ridge, the evening birds were starting their songs. Ezekiel and Rosalind slept side by side beneath their pine cross on the eastern ridge, and nearby lay Sister Prudence, who had come west in 1880 to live out her final days with her ward, and who had asked to be buried on the mountain when her time came, and whose wish had been granted the following year. 3 stones. A 4th for Thaddeus Thorne lay farther down the slope. Josephine leaned her head against Everett's shoulder. "Winter always ends," she said. "It does," he answered. The sun slipped behind the Beartooth Mountains, and the 4 of them stood there in the gold-fading light, 4 silhouettes on a porch that had been built by their own hands, and the house behind them was full of the voices of children who had been raised in a family the world had told them could not exist, and who had grown up to prove the world wrong. Some promises take 17 years to come home. Some loves take 3 hearts instead of 2. Some winters teach you what you are made of, and when those winters end, they end in a spring that lasts 30 years and counting.